So AI security, this is where all the fun stuff happens. This is where you're going to set up all your rules that basically say, when this event happens, I want this action to take place. And that action is some form or fashion in which you are going to be notified that the event in question has taken place. So action rules are essentially going to be your collective of that nature. Event, action, that's your rule. Within that, you can set up your AI triggers. So the AI triggers built into the box: intrusion, occupancy, loitering, stopping, enter, exit, line crossing. Again, depending on the licenses that you add to the box, you may have additional stuff listed here, or you may have a few things less. Think intrusion, occupancy, loitering, stopping, enter, exit, and line crossing were all built into the box.
Question real quick. You probably get to it, but let's say you're watching like a parking lot or a dealership or something like that. Now, what is the best analytic to use? Would you use intrusion? Would you use occupancy, enter, exit?
As much as we would love everything to be cookie cutter, there's always going to be something unique to every deployment. So the best analytic for a deployment is going to depend on the environment of that deployment. It might be a situation where they want intrusion detection. And what I mean by that is it's after hours. They want to know if somebody comes on site. That's going to be an intrusion type or a loitering type of alert. You could also utilize line crossing and enter exit. The best analytic is going to be determined by the intent of its purpose. And I mean by the purpose that the customer requires, not by necessarily the purpose of the analytic. And what I mean by that is when you're very familiar with the hows and whys of the analytic, you find out you can use it for more than just its straight out titled intent. So like intrusion is the title of the analytic. If you understand the hows and whys of how it works, you can kind of massage it to be utilized for different types of purposes, because all the analytics at their heart do the same thing. I've got a zone or a line and something has crossed it or entered it or appeared or exited it. That's the basics of all analytics. If you understand that, you basically have a mastery of understanding for analytics, and you'll be able to deploy them in a much more purposeful process than a haphazard one. And with analytics, you really don't want haphazard. The biggest thing I understand about analytics, it's not a camera. You can take a camera, you can hang it up in the worst possible angle. As long as you can visually see your target, then it doesn't matter, because it's a camera. It's a visual medium. The only thing you have to worry about is visual obscurance of your target. Truck pulled in front, car pulled in front, somebody standing in front of the camera. Those are things you have absolutely no control over. A sensor, and that's the way to think of any analytic, is as a sensor. It's either going to work or it's not. And by that fashion, it's going to work or not work if you don't have the sensor at the right height, if you don't have the sensor at the right angle, if you don't have the space in between your target point, whether that's a floor area or an entrance area. Anything obscures that line of sight, it's going to disrupt the sensor's ability to function in the expected way. So what do I mean by that? Picture we've got a sensor 10 feet up on a wall, pointing it down at roughly a 30-degree angle, and it's covering a zone. So that zone, just think of it as a floor. So now anything walks around that zone, obviously it's not going to trip because it doesn't come into the zone. When something comes into the zone, the sensor detects it and it trips your event. Now, if something is blocking that sensor, well, obviously you can't detect anything on the floor because the sensor acts like a projection. It is projecting that zone onto the floor, but now if something is directly in front of that sensor, it's projecting it onto that object. Well, that means anything on the other side of that object is not seen. And since it's a sensor and not a visual camera, even though you might be using a camera, the analytic is still that of a sensor. And so if that sensor is projecting its zone onto whatever object is directly in front of the sensor, it's not going to work.
Something where we're using, I think, intrusion, and it's watching a parking lot. Yeah, we're getting alerts for it when nothing is moving at all.
All that actually is not true. What's happening is the intrusion analytic is detecting movement, but it's not detecting movement of people. It may not be detecting movement of an object, such as a vehicle, and it may not be detecting an animal, but I guarantee it's detecting shadow changes or light glare.
Okay, so light glare and stuff affects. Are there any best practices for that stop that from happening?
That's going to be a catch-22. Again, your environment where it's deployed really is going to be indicative of how you're going to counter that. So analytics, even though we use the word artificial intelligence, the analytic part is anything but intelligent in terms of being able to determine that, oh, that's not the object of interest. So what ends up happening is an analytic, so I'm being specific to analytic, not AI. Analytic is exactly that. It's your sensor, it's your zone. Its primary purpose is to detect a change. It doesn't know and it won't recognize if that change is brought on about because of a person, an object, an animal, or a shadow, or a bright light creating a contrast in the image. So in other words, pixelation, pixel change. Anything in that scene is going to change a pixel. So I said cameras, camera, sensor, sensor, but when you're dealing with analytics, bear in mind it's being applied, projected onto a visual image.
Is there any way to adjust that level? Let's say just the rate where it sends. Maybe it has to wait a couple seconds before the shadow change.
That's where your AI comes into place. This is why analytics have become a big tool once more, because now we're starting to apply AI to it. And what the AI does, it acts as that second set of eyes. It acts as a filter. So what the AI is going to do when properly set up is it's going to filter out. So if you want it only to basically acknowledge an event based on a person being in a scene versus, say, an animal or an object, then you're going to use the filter of person. So in other words, the AI is going to say, okay, I'm not going to transmit any events unless they coincide with a person being in the scene. Now, again, nothing is 100%. We're dealing with technology, and technology is never 100%. The things that are going to influence the accuracy level is going to be deployment, objects in the scene, proper configuration of the AI, of the analytic. All those things come into place. So bear in mind when we're talking about these things, they don't get done in 3 seconds. They're something that require basically a burn-in time period. So you're going to go in. If you're dealing with outdoor environments, understand those outdoor environments change over time. So one day it's sunny, one day it rains. Next day there's snow. Next day you have overcast. Finding the balance between those changes in configuring your analytics that will allow you to minimize the false positives. You're never going to get rid of them, but you can certainly minimize them. And we can get into ways of doing that. We'll get into that after I just kind of get you that familiarity with the interface first.
Okay.
It's one of those things where it requires you to play with this stuff, and really understanding the hows and the whys will get you very far in deploying things quicker than less. So intrusion, occupancy, loitering, stopping, entering and exit, line crossing, that is a straight analytic. Don't think of it as AI because we haven't applied any AI to it. That is your initial zone or line. Keeping an understanding of analytics very simple, understanding the how and the why of an analytic. I have a zone or I have a line. There is no other type of analytic in that respect. So not to be confused with like motion detection or something of that nature. This is, you are creating a zone or you are creating a line, and then you are applying an algorithm to detect intrusion, to detect occupancy, detect loitering, stopping, entering or exit. So if you understand that basic, you're already a long ways along in your understanding of how the analytic works. And then we'll get into that deployment and adding AI to make it even better, reducing those false positives. Advanced is typically license-based. By way of example, there's counters, there's social distancing. Again, we discussed face recognition, mask, sunglasses, LPR. So advanced AI triggers are usually, if they are not already existing licenses, they might be custom AI that can be applied to the analytic. Now, what I mean by that is like mask or sunglasses, that is teaching the AI to recognize if somebody's wearing a mask, not wearing a mask inappropriately. So in other words, they have it like below their nose, below their mouth. If someone's wearing sunglasses or not wearing sunglasses. When you look at the AI box, don't consider it a closed solution. It's a flexible one that can learn. Now, if you have a situation, and I mean, right here we're talking about masks and sunglasses. Let's just say hard hats, for argument's sake. You got a situation where they need to be alerted if somebody's wearing a hard hat or not wearing a hard hat. We can train the AI to recognize that. Maybe it's a hospital where they're getting, they have the red bags with all the dangerous content in it, and those red bags can only go into certain garbage cans. Well, we can teach the AI to recognize that red bag and alert you if that red bag is not going into the right disposal disposal unit. So just things to bear in mind in the back of your head. All right, system trigger. So system trigger is more your physical aspects of the AI box. So your alarm ins, you normally close, normally open. If somebody tries to tamper with the unit itself, if there's a recurrence to some of the system tampering, stuff of that nature. There's also a virtual trigger that you can create. Again, those would be more things you might tie into existing alarm panels. There's a schedule, so you can basically say, okay, I want this trigger to be enabled during this time frame, but disabled outside that time frame. Event action. So this is your event happens, and now what action is going to take place based off of that event. So from a network perspective, through the network, we can send an email. We can send an HTTP string. And that might be something that ties into, in this case, the example is a Raspberry Pi. If everyone's familiar with those little palm top computers that are running a version of Linux. So basically, HTTP can be used to send any type of HTTP scripting. So whether it's Python, maybe it's a JSON file, or anything of that nature, that's what the HTTP would be used for. So you can use it in conjunction with digital signage, for argument's sake. Sending information to a digital signage for it to display. TCP is kind of the same concept, except you're using the TCP protocol as opposed to the HTTP protocol to send that same information. I think FTP, honestly, if you've been working in technology and you don't know what FTP is at this point, you're a noob. Let's be honest. FTP has been around for so long. S3, so essentially S3 should be related, I think it's supposed to be S3 in terms of an access panel. I'll have to get back to that one because it also might be related to our Sequanet, which is a communications protocol we have in the boxes that we haven't really taken advantage of yet. And then there's OnViv. OnViv might be something that you utilize when working in conjunction with a video management platform, like our Quattro application, for argument's sake. Because the box has an OnViv communications protocol, it can communicate with that VMS for some of the basic stuff. The intrusion, occupancy. So these are OnViv flags that can be sent over the OnViv protocol to your VMS. Again, your VMS has to have on its side the ability to recognize these events. If it doesn't, there's other ways of going about this, like the HTTP or the TCP. But if it does, it just makes setup that much more easier. Okay, system. Again, this is all the hardware aspect of the box. Okay. So alarm, disarm, alarm out. There's an audio back channel if you're utilizing audio with one of the cameras.
Got a speaker connected to the...
Well, the speaker would not be directly connected. It's not going to be a speaker directly connected to the AI box. It might be connected through the camera, through the device itself. If you have a speaker that supports RTSP streaming, or if you have a speaker that supports OnViv, I think it's Profile T for the audio back channel. It might be Profile G. I forget that they get so many of them. But if it's supported, then there is the potential for that. I say potential because my experience has been, regardless of what a manufacturer says, if I haven't physically tested it beforehand, I don't know the characteristics that are going to be brought to the table. And I would rather know those characteristics prior to being in front of a customer and discovering that the characteristics are not what I expect. So like anything, I'm always going to preface it with, always test it out first before acknowledging that it works. Don't ever do it in front of a customer. I would not test the audio back channel in front of you, for argument's sake, thinking that it works and then finding out that it doesn't work because I didn't test the equipment. With all the different technologies that are out there, I'll use OnViv as the perfect example. OnViv has 3 different ways, 3 different flags, just from motion event. And if your manufacturer of a device has not actually programmed for all 3 potential flags, you've only programmed for 1, and your other device, which is supposed to be handshaking with that flag, is using a different of the 3 options, obviously no handshaking is going to take place. And there's just no way of knowing until you take the devices, put them together, and test them if they properly handshake. Proactive is always better than reactive. Video pop-up, I believe this is related to what you see in the live screen. So with the video pop-up, if you're looking at the multi-screen like this and the video pop-up is enabled, that particular screen should come up full screen for the X number of seconds that you've got configured for. Again, if you're using the HDMI output like a spot out. RS485, counter reset. So if you're using counters or counter analytics, there's a way to reset that counter, and you can basically, it's set off of time generally, but you could also have it set by an input. So if a certain event happens, it could reset the count for you. A certain time frame has been hit, say 12 a.m., it resets the counters for you. If your deployment requires it, it's always an option, never a necessity. Okay, VMS. So this is where there are direct integrations from the AI box to specific VMSs. So our Ganz Control has integration. There's also a level of integration with Genetec, NX, Network Optics. There's also integration with its plugins. NVR, DVR, as I mentioned before, Sequanet. Sequanet is something that we utilize with our Digimaster and Pixelmaster embedded recording devices, which I believe is what the S3 actually is for. It's just a way for the AI box to directly communicate with our Digimaster or with our Pixelmaster to provide analytics for cameras that are going to be utilized in conjunction with those devices.
VMS thing again?
So VMS is video management software. So ExactVision, Milestone, Genetec, our Control software. There's others that are out there. Digital Watchdog has their own video management software, for argument's sake.
So how does ExactVision work, though?
Well, in this case, we don't have a direct tie-in or direct integration with ExactVision.
Okay.
So you would have to shake hands with ExactVision through the network side, either through HTTP or TCP or OnViv. And we'll just pick on ExactVision for a little bit here. So if ExactVision has a way of taking in and putting out communications through the HTTP protocol, then the AI box and ExactVision can shake hands. Same thing if it does TCP protocol for handshaking. And I'm just going to comment to here, and let me just pull up one of these by way of example. Here's an HTTP preset. We're telling the AI box who we're handshaking with, that IP address, and then we're sending this HTTP command with, it's a JSON script, I'm not positive. Essentially, we're sending that script to whatever is at the other end of 192.168.2.212. ExactVision, at the very least, has to be able to recognize this HTTP information packet that's coming at it from the AI box. As long as ExactVision is capable of doing that, you get handshaking. You don't need that direct integration because there's options, there's flexibility. And it would be the same concept if we're using the TCP protocol. It would look exactly like what we see here, except instead of going over HTTP, it would be going over TCP. The biggest thing with the AI box is, again, it comes down to hows and whys. How does it work? Why does it work? If you understand the basics of it, forget the advanced stuff, just understand the basic. You can easily work from there in terms of how you can get things to work. So again, ExactVision, no direct integration for the ExactVision VMS with the AI box at this time. So how can I make ExactVision and the AI box work together? Two ways that immediately come to mind: HTTP, TCP. OnViv would be a third one if ExactVision supports OnViv on that level. Okay, so that's events. There is a level of statistics that you can get from the box related to the events. Understand, though, it is limited in its intent and purpose. So in this case, we can get counting statistics. So if we've got a channel that is counting, let's just say the TSD entrance has counting happening, we can turn around. We have to say, okay, what analytic or trigger type is actually running? We'll say line crossing. What's the count type, hourly or daily? We'll leave it at hourly. And then we can select our date range. So let's say December 1st, today the 16th, counting. And then I can export that information to a CSV file. So if the data doesn't exist, you're just not going to get any response. We also got reporting. So here I have reporting set up. So weekly, Tuesday, 5 o'clock, I think, roughly. So 5 o'clock every Tuesday, I'm going to get an email with any LPR related data. And it's going to be just, again, it's not going to be of great detail. It's going to be just general stuff. And you can see the setup for it is pretty straightforward. Again, we can always go into deeper detail. I just want to kind of get the navigation out of the way. But that's the thing to be aware of from the statistics side. You potentially have more in-depth reports possible through your video management software, depending on what video management software you might be using, than you necessarily do from the box itself. Bearing in mind, because it is a net appliance, its scope of reporting is going to be basic. So it may not necessarily have the type of information you're looking for, and it may. Test it, confirm it, and go from there.